I talked with two longtime figures in Ohio politics about what the rejection of Issue 1 means going forward. First up, David Pepper, who chaired the Ohio Democratic Party from 2015 to 2020 and has written and spoken on political power in statehouses.
You've been working with the no side. You've been speaking out about issue one a lot on Twitter, in interviews and national interviews and that sort of thing. But you've also been in Ohio politics for a long time. So were you surprised at the final result?
I mean, in the end, I wasn't. I mean, obviously, if you've been a Democrat and you've been around a lot of elections, you take nothing for granted. I think the yes side, obviously, the last week we saw an uptick in their activity. That made it a little closer. My guess is if they hadn't done that, they would actually lost by worse. But over the course of the month, this incredible coalition of Republicans, independents, Democrats, all basically saying this is democracy itself. This is too much. We may disagree on other things, but this is too much. And at some point, you have a coalition like that build up, and it's pretty hard to stop. Like they tried at the end to scare their voters to show up and hope for, I'm sure, a low turnout, but the broader coalition, and you see it in a Greene County voting no, in a Geauga County voting no, in a Butler County 50-50. Like there were too many people who just saw this for what it was. And that included a lot of Republicans, a lot of independents, some sporadic voters that don't show up in every election. And I just think it was too much. And their last push maybe saved them losing by, ironically, more than 60-40. But it clearly wasn't enough. And on election day itself, I because I've been through this and I can see we saw good voting in our large counties. But in 2018, it was a huge rural surge that elected Mike DeWine. I started driving to rural areas and spot checking those polls. And you could just see that whatever the yes I was doing had not inspired people to show up. And you could sense in small towns and rural areas, people who were literally at the polls for the no side, convincing people to vote no, and a very low, anemic turnout. They were trying to scare their voters to think this was something that it wasn't, and it clearly didn't work. And the no side saw it for what it was, and clearly were motivated to show up almost as if it was a midterm election.
How does this potentially help Democrats with some of their problems with that, for finding quality candidates, building up a bench for future races, and obviously raising the money to compete against well-funded Republicans?
I mean, I think it gives momentum to that, but I do still think, and this is I've started something in Ohio to help do this. There's not really an infrastructure right now, and we're trying to build it, that says, actually, we do value running everywhere. Traditionally, Democrats only focus on swing states, and that's why whether or not Ohio is determined as a swing state for federal purposes is everything. And my philosophy is that's not good enough anymore. When we don't run in tons of places, where we don't even talk to millions of Ohioans about the state house because we're not running in their districts, we are allowing all this kind of stuff like issue one to happen. And the people who do it don't even have an election the next November. That's how you lose. And that's why they keep doing it. But I do think this is a wake-up call that this state house is out of touch with Ohio. They made an end run to destroy our democracy. They were stopped. But anyone who voted for that, Brian Stewart, whoever else, and I met Brian Stewart's opponent the other day. I'm thrilled. We've got this incredible guy running against him. Everywhere we go, there should be people knocking on doors and passing out flyers explaining what they just tried to do. And you're not going to win everywhere, of course, but that's the beginning of accountability for people who, frankly, have lived in the state house, the most corrupt in the country. They're in the most corrupt state house in the country, yet still they feel no accountability because too often we're either not running against them or we're not helping people run against them. So they just keep doing what they're doing. I mean, the speaker, as you know better than me, just got locked up for 20 years. And instead of reforming, they go and do something to make themselves even less accountable. That is a place that is desperately telling the rest of us they need a dose of accountability, and they need people knocking on doors, explaining what they're doing to try and push them in a different direction.
Of course, you're referring to former House Speaker Larry Householder,
Right.
And along with former Ohio Republican Party Chair Matt Borges. Does this map that we got out of this results, especially when you look at results in the Youngstown area and near Toledo, where Democrats have been losing ground in statewide elections in the past few years, give Democrats a roadmap to try to reach voters who have maybe gone toward Republican candidates, especially as Sherrod Brown's reelection is coming up next
Yes,
year.
it gives a very nice roadmap. Again, for not just a Democratic map, and obviously that's something Sherrod Brown's going to worry about, but a democracy map, an accountability map, this state house's way carried away map. And it wasn't just, it was every county along Lake Erie. If every county along Lake Erie agrees with something, that's it, folks. If you're running for president in the future, free advice to anyone who does it. If you win every county on Lake Erie, you are the president of the United States. So we have that whole belt. We have large Republican counties, Delaware, boom, big win. Butler, 50-50. You have Greene County. I was there the day before the election, Tuesday before. They told me they were doing Hawken waves and everyone was saying, we're with you. So it wasn't even just the old Democratic areas. And it was great to see them come back. And by the way, those are the areas that elected Jennifer Bruner, if you look back in 2020, when she won the Supreme Court race. Similar map. This map has some similarities to Sherrod's map in 18, by the way. But you start to see these quite conservative counties also saying, well, we may be Republican, but we're not for politicians stealing power from the people. That's a map that might also lend itself to ending gerrymandering if that comes forward again. The same, the same people saying, hey, we don't agree with politicians rigging democracy, which was what this was. That might be a map that foretells how you pass future efforts to get rid of the gerrymandering entirely. So yeah, all that is good, but it wasn't just the old Democratic counties coming back. It was much lower turnout in red counties, meaning they weren't impressed by the arguments. It was high turnout in large, higher educated counties, in suburbs, which again meant that Warren County was closer than it ever should be if you're a Republican. Butler County tied, and really strong turnouts in the suburbs of Hamilton, Franklin, Cuyahoga. Put that together, and yeah, that's a winning coalition for not just candidates, but my hope is we got to get rid of gerrymandering in this state. That's a winning map for a future effort to get rid of gerrymandering and get these politicians away from the gerrymandering process that they so abused in the last couple of years.
Turning to November, we've got the abortion rights amendment, but also potentially a law that would legalize marijuana as well. We saw a preview of how the opposition is going to be pushing back on the abortion rights amendment by raising the question about what point at which abortion should be legal, but also messaging that's off topic about drag queens and things like that, and disinformation, for instance, about gender transition surgery for minors.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of money involved in this as well. How do you get prepared for the onslaught of what's going to happen in November, and how do you get voters prepared for that who are probably exhausted by all of this?
Yeah. I mean, I think the voters on the no side are exhausted. Maybe today, you can hear my voice. I'm a little tired, but they're energized. And they're going to keep right on going. And everyone who signed that petition knows that state house tried to make their petition meaningless. I think you're going to see energy that builds, and the same coalition virtually keep building.